And now we have a short, now for our main program, we will have Beth Knox introduce J.J. McKay.
Thank you, President Kim. J.J. McKay has been described by GeekWire as a Seattle startup advisor and relationship guru. And judging by the number of Rotarians who came up to say hello to a longtime friend, I think that is absolutely true. He combines vision, energy, leadership, and the ability to execute a plan with swift precision. He has spent the past 2 decades helping to build and grow large-scale, consumer-focused organizations, both regional and national in scope. He is a connected, strategic, and natural leader who values hard work and a team-building environment. He thrives in the startup arena, where he has vast experience in sales, connecting with the consumer, partnerships, and large audience capture. With a unique, media-savvy perspective and a broad global reach across multiple industries, JJ is able to parlay his vision to both business and editorial objectives. He is currently serving on the board of U.S. Bank. He's immediate past chair of Mary's Place, and also is on the board of the Pike Place Market Preservation Development Authority. Here to share his insight on the fast-growing legal marijuana and CBD industry, please welcome J.J. McKay.
Well, I'm sure 10 years ago you didn't think you'd be up here talking about weed, did you? I didn't either because, believe it or not, I don't use weed, I drink, and I love drinking. As many of my friends will share with you, vodka is my preferred method. And so after spending a long time helping other companies, I kind of backed into the opportunity of a brand new industry. And it was such a nascent industry, but generating so much attention that I couldn't help be drawn to it, mainly because someone drugged me in kicking and screaming. But I quickly learned that there wasn't a natural leader to the industry. So that's when I started The Fresh Toast. We are a media content company that actualizes and monetizes on 2 sets of the house. We are a digital company that develops the most content every week about cannabis, CBD, and medical marijuana, and then in part we syndicate that out to the conservative Chicago Tribune and newspapers around the United States and Canada. So roughly over 1 million people see our content every day. Starting next week when we roll in another 250, where it'll be about 3 million people every day read our content. And in Canada, 28% of all cannabis stories read are our stories. And then on the flip side, because it's so important, and we'll talk about myths in a second, no one felt they had a place to go for safe medical information. So we are the medical marijuana partner for the largest healthcare training company in the nation. We deal with about 50,000 doctors every week, helping them understand the conversation around medical marijuana, and we will grow to about 20% of all practicing physicians by this time next year. So it's a booming market, but it's evolved very quickly. And primarily when you look at this, you look about how just a few years ago it was Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and it was really a stoner mentality, but it's now become quite accepted. You know, within our own system, half of our top 10 investors are Republicans. We have names like the Rockefellers, the Lears, the Nordstroms who have been backing it at all. And you see it in very mainstream shows that it's no longer carrying the same stigma. In fact, it's in 33 states that have voted for it and Washington, D.C. It's also it's legal in Canada, which technically was the second country to elect it. Uruguay was the first, but then they kind of pulled their mind together to actually implement it. So Canada was the first to actually implement a fully legal system. Now, who supports it? Well, the Republicans support it. It's a very popular part out in there, and there's a lot of Republicans who have made a lot of money in that. And in fact, Fox News has 2 people that have joined boards, including Judge Jeannie Pirro. Millennials, they see this as a very safe option to drinking, and medical science demonstrates that in the fact that alcohol is much harsher on your system than cannabis. Now, once again, I drink, so I can kind of testify on that. But like alcohol, cannabis shouldn't be taken by underage people who haven't fully developed. So it's really for the over 21 crowd because your brain's still forming. We're very lucky and we're very methodical, and we work very hard to make sure that nothing is done marketing in the industry. We don't, less than 1% of our readers are under 18, and then we also at times try to guide other companies through media actions to make sure they don't market toward that. And then last, the New England Journal of Medicine actually did a survey several years ago, and 76% of doctors say that they're for medical marijuana because it has benefits for everybody. Now, what do we see? Fox News, this was a turning point in the industry as Fox News no longer talks about it as the big sin, rather they talk about a big economic gain, and really now they tend to follow it through that type of system. So that in itself was a transformational part of the country. So you're scratching your head and thinking, why isn't it fully legal? Well, I don't want to spoil it. So you got to understand sin. There are 5 great sins in the United States, 5 great sins industry. We won't talk about sugar because it's incredibly complicated. But the 4 big sins are alcohol, porn, tobacco, and cannabis. So alcohol, by far the easiest. 232 million people drink alcohol at least once out of the year, and it's a very profitable industry, 238 billion. California has been hit in the beer industry because they've seen upon legalization beers come down. So that's the gold standard. Next biggest and most popular is porn. 120 million people tune in to some type of porn every year, and as I learned from my executive friends at Costco, porn has been the driver in many of the great technological challenges in the world, including online streaming and online pay. Unfortunately, the industry has changed to a point where, believe it or not, people are just uploading their own porn complimentary, and so it isn't as lucrative an industry as you want and has dropped down to only 25 billion. The next but most lucrative industry is tobacco. You have 58 million people who still smoke in the United States, but they generate much more profits. Part of that is the tobacco industry has become much, much, much more effective, and those 50 plus million no longer feel price sensitive. They will pay whatever it takes. So yes, there are a lot of taxes, but the core part of a cigarette is actually costs more now. And then last you come into tobacco, cannabis. Cannabis today is roughly over a $10 million industry. They think in 2030 it will be closer to a $30 billion industry. And since I started this 3.5 years ago, CBD has cleaved off to be its own separate industry of the same size. So when I started this 3.5 years ago, CBD and marijuana were married. Now they're dating, let's call it, and they each plan to be over $30 billion. And within CBD, you see it in Amazon, CVS, and for those of you in the retail industry, Dillard's, the southern-based chain, department store chain, is now announcing a CBD gift bag that'll be in all of their stores throughout their during the holiday season. So what does this mean? Well, how many of you have invested in the cannabis industry or in a stock or have been following stocks? Yeah, so you know everybody wants to get rich quick. When I started raising money 3.5 years ago, people would say, "Oh, I would love to invest, but I'm going to invest in a grower, and you know if I give them $10,000 now, I'll get $250,000 within a year." Yeah, that was a bunch of hooey, except right before Canada went legal. Right before Canada went legal, the entire market was based on CEOs doing presentations, PowerPoints, and personal messages, and the industry went crazy. Privateer, which is based here, or has part of their offices here, went from $20 to $150 and would swing within $20 to $30 a day, and people who never thought about it day traded. Well, then Canada went fully legal, and guess what? All the promises made by the big companies didn't happen yet. It takes 3 to 5 years for a market to fully integrate and to become settled. So guess where Privateer is today with their Tilray product? $21. And it will be another year or two before they get there, if they make it, because the big change in the industry is you start having adult supervision. I know you think everybody in the cannabis industry is like a crazy cowboy stoner, and there are a lot of cowboys, but they tend to be cowboys from Wall Street and much less from the backwoods and driving a minivan. So what you have are a lot of guys who are good at building and stock manipulation, but about 1.5 years ago, Constellation, one of the largest alcohol companies in the world, invested almost $5 billion in Canopy Grow. Now, I'm not suggesting anybody invest or support Canopy Grow, but that was a turning point for the industry. But the bigger turning point happened 3 months ago when they fired the CEO. And now they've brought in the CFO of Constellation as the board chairman, and they're going to bring it in because now, for the first time, you have a multi-billion-dollar cannabis company that's run by someone who understands how to run and deliver profits on a multi-billion-dollar company. And more importantly, when you look at the big three potential partners within the cannabis industry, which is big pharma, big tobacco, or big alcohol is the most natural partner because they tend to get everything. Of course, everybody asks me, because I'm gay and single, if anybody knows anybody, it's legal in 33 states, and that's what gay marriage did, so it should be fully legal there. Well, part of that issue is money. So when you look at the industry size and you see it grow, and the biggest fact is that whenever a state goes public or goes legal, the biggest fight is over who's going to get the revenue. You know, look here in the state of Washington versus the state of Colorado. Colorado was not greedy, and they set a cap. And in fact, they sell so much weed that in parts of December, they actually have tax-free days. Washington was greedy and charged a lot more for tax. Well, here's the difference. 90% of the black market in Colorado has gone away. It hasn't had an impact here. So there's still a vibrant black market. So you have to tax less to be able to move the consumers into something that's more price affordable. As I may have mentioned earlier, we approach cannabis like wine or liquor. Wine or aspirin. What people tend to forget is cannabis is a consumer-driven product. And so we pair it with wine. So the number one way people pick wine is price. Two is label, 3 is recommendation. So even people who only drink very, very good wines will drink crappy wine at someone's bar mitzvah. And that is how the wine industry understands it, because as we all know from Two Buck Chuck, which came partially out of this state, transformed and became a billion-dollar industry very quick by teaching people to order red and white. The cannabis industry is an industry full of sommeliers trying to sell to Applebee's. So you can talk to any bartender, and 90% of the way people order wine is, I'll have a red, and then they take the bartender's organization. You talk to someone in the cannabis industry, and they're like, I want something maybe a 60% Loire, 40% Southern France, aged oak, maybe kind of a brownish color, and done in 2013. That just doesn't happen. There's a small group who does, but it just really doesn't happen. I've spent the last 2 years talking all over the United States to all the major wine industry and restaurant industry events, and what you hear is people understand that. Largest selling wine seller in the country, Costco. The cannabis industry doesn't quite feel that, and they're constantly trying to push this salvation product on the consumer, and it doesn't particularly happen. So the industry itself hasn't come to full round about where it's going, and that's causing a little dragging into the industry, but the potential for it is also there. The other thing I want to so in the United States last year, states, not counties, not cities, states made over $700 million in revenue. So there were well over $1 billion in revenue for people. So now you understand the big numbers that are going into all this. And that is why you have states who, like Colorado with Hickenlooper, was against it and is for it. Now, you also have over, we'll go back here, over 200,000 people work in the cannabis industry, and half of that are good paying jobs. That is 3 times the size of the coal industry. So it is a very vibrant, growing community. And we haven't had this type of industry ever since the DVD. How many people remember when VHS came out? Well, once again, porn had a big thing of that. So when it came out, it was VHS versus Blu-ray. And the porn, beta, the porn industry picked VHS, beta died. It all became VHS. But when you looked at it, you had the people who created content, you had people who marketed and got it all ready to ship it out, and then you had retailers. And then when you look at the lifespan, which was the first time in the United States we looked at a shortened lifespan of an industry. It went from mom and pops to grocery stores to Blockbusters to streaming, and now being on your computer, on your TV. So incredibly, within 25 years, you looked at a transformational part of an industry. Cannabis is the same way. We're starting with mom and pop, but I can assure you Walgreens, Walmart, and CVS are very attuned to the industry, as are Pfizer, Constellation, Anheuser-Busch, and Goldman Sachs. So you will see an accelerated opportunity in this industry, and it will become much more mainstream within the next 10 years. Now, this kind of plays to my statement is look how long it took for products to reach 50 million. And the amazing thing is Pokemon Go, to get 50 million people to adapt that, took 19 days. And the study out there, the most recent study that says 2/3 of American will try weed if it's legal. And a lot of people, and I get asked all the time, and it took me a journey to recognize that we're the most trusted voice in weed, and having everyone either share their story or ask me a question of what they can do, especially when it comes to medical. Truly, between 20 and 25% of all cannabis purchases are to do with something around a medical issue, whether it's anxiety, back pain, arthritis, and a variety of other things. So it's a huge difference. You look at category growth, no, edibles are not the biggest. It's always weed. It's always a flower followed by vape, followed by oil, because those are the easiest. We're not used to how edibles react to us, and it doesn't do anything. We're used with alcohol of having one drink when you're on a first date and being like, I know maybe it's the wine talking, but I have 7 cats and I like to watch TV in the nude. With weed and an edible, you can't do that because you're sitting there thinking, oh my God, I got 45 minutes before this hits in. And the date's over and you're in the car and then you're just crying because it was so bad. So here's the other thing that the industry cracks me up with, because people are really confused, and people are rightly concerned, because the biggest and hardest thing about the industry right now is it's not regulated federally. So whether you're for big government or not big government, we all know that when we go to the grocery store, whatever grocery store it is, if we buy a can of tuna, we know what's in there. That is not the case right now in the industry. There are some unique players, shall we say, who have a variety of things in there that may or may not be what you want. There are a lot of legitimate players, but there aren't. And part of the reason that is doctors aren't going to prescribe between now and full legalization is it's not covered by malpractice, it's not covered by insurance, and there's not a consistent product between state to state. So if you're in Washington State, if you're Mike, who starts a great brand here in Washington State, he has to set up a separate company in Oregon to do it. And if he doesn't do that, he has to license it. And the moment you license it, you begin losing a little control. So there's a whole difference on product. But once the FDA comes in, you'll be able to get it. There was a company called Black Diamond that was selling CBD products that went crazy. Well, do you know why? Because there was no CBD in it. They actually had something else that was highly addictive, and people couldn't get enough of it, and the FDA had to crack it down on it. We follow all that, and then thanks to the fact that we have 3 million people, we kind of crack the whip a little bit, which doesn't always engender us to the population. The funniest thing when I spoke to Vibe, which is the largest alcohol conference, is you had people from the alcohol industries like, you need to make sure that everything that you do with cannabis tastes like cannabis, because people need to know they're taking something that can intoxicate them. Then the cannabis industry is like, we're proud of who we are. Every product needs to have that funky, skunky smell to it because it's cannabis. So I'm in there and I bring this up, and everybody in the room, it's like 850 people of alcohol and restaurant area, and they're all nodding, yes, it needs to taste like cannabis. I'm like, I'm so glad we all agree, because the consumer can care less. Because if that was true, we wouldn't have Cosmopolitans, mango mojitos, or apple pale ales. No one wants to taste the flavor of certain alcohol, especially really bad, cheap alcohol. That's why God made sugar. So you're going to see an evolution in the cannabis industry, and that's why vaping's so popular, because it doesn't have the funky smell. Though this is just because everybody's in this room. There's a lot of myths out there about cannabis, no, you can't get a contact. The only way you can get a contact high if you're squeezed into one of those car-to-go things, the electric cards, and you travel from like here to LA with 3 people constantly smoking and you've taped it up. That is just a myth. The other thing is, I hear from a lot of people who are a little older than me. I'm in my late 40s and still single, and looking. But people who are over their 40s find that this is a very popular way to re-engage in a more healthy and active romance life, shall we say. And it's actually done really well. People say, right now, 90% of people spend less than $50 while they're buying it, as you can see, and only a small percent are spending over $100. So it's very much like a beer market. You look at some of the sizes of some of the big players that are going on the market, that's going on. We have one here. And then what I want to close it to you is change is really difficult. And this is something new, but it's not a new market. This market's been, our first partner, syndication partner, was the New York Daily News. And they said to me, why should, oh my God, it was like an inquisition. It was like 15 days of emails. And his last question was, why should we do it? Because it's not legal in New York State. And I said, and yet New York State is the 3rd most populous state to use cannabis. And his next statement was, here, let me introduce you to Grant Whitmore, who will be working with you. The alcohol industry is scared because, as we've seen in beer, it does have an effect. But at the end of the day, is cannabis to alcohol like water was to soda? The top 3 ways that we drink water now is tap, branded bottle, and Dasani. Coke was the only one who saw it as a market mover, moved in and introduced the first large branded, and that is the 3rd way we consume water in this country. So that's I'm going to take a little time to ask questions, because I'm sure some people may have some questions. So the charming young lady in the front.
Thank you, and I have 2 men to introduce you to.
Oh, perfect.
Just so you know.
My ex was an executive at the Wall Street Journal, which I don't read anymore because of that.
My question is, how long do you believe it will take before we are legal nationwide?
I think we will go fully legal in 22, and then it will be a fully set up industry in 25. It will take 3 years because the FDA does not move quickly, and you're going to want to have a lot of opportunity around that.
So thank you for your highly entertaining and informative conversation. Why is it a Republican? Why is it so heavily Republican as opposed to Democratic or bipartisan?
So a lot of people have made a lot of money in this industry. And, Republicans drink alcohol just as much as Democrats. So when you really look behind people's doors, it's how they relax. And they saw a good business opportunity. And we've seen it all around. That's why you see Judge John Boehner, who jumped all into cannabis as soon as he got out of Congress.
I don't think I've laughed at Rotary this much for a long time, so thank you.
We love that.
Yeah. I was able to visit a growing operation in Soto, and I was amazed by the amount of compliance that they had to go through. Can you talk about the federal oversight in alcohol versus the state level, and where that would go if it goes legal at the federal level?
So, yeah, it's really simple. At the federal level, you can't buy a can of tuna without everyone knowing exactly what's in that can of tuna. Every state tries to do that, but most states don't have the resources, and some players tend to be a little different. And currently, the way we grow through indoor grow and some other stuff makes it a lot more complicated. When it goes federally legal, you're going to see people who invest in indoor grow are going to lose money because the South will grow. And at the end of the day, the public really doesn't care between indoor and outdoor as long as it gets them stoned. And you can laugh at this, but let me just share one thing that blows people away in the cannabis industry, which I'm always surprised at, because I'm like, it's just common sense. The top 3 beers in the United States, Bud Light, Miller Lite, Coors Light, and they own over 65% of the market. How many of you can actually say, I drink Coors Light because of the flavor? So people don't care as long as it's inexpensive. And so that will change, and outdoor grow will make a difference. I hope that answered. I can talk to you more right afterwards.
Hi there. I'm wondering if you can tell us anything about the recent controversy with the vaping and the oils and the damage and the deaths that are happening from that. I know it's not necessarily cannabis specific, but there's been a lot of information recently about that.
And a chunk of it is. So there's been over 200 people sick. So we follow that. We have a Surgeon General who helps it. We're to be doing a story next week on this. And we've done a lot of other medical stories around that. It all comes back to not being federally legal. And not having that FDA. Vaping, second most popular. Vaping also the easiest. There's no skunk. It's in many ways much safer than anything else, but it's gotten caught out. And you have to understand, in the vaping industry, the biggest family behind that is the Pritzker family. From the Hyatt Hotel family. So they own a huge stake in that industry. So they're trying to make it come back. There's been a lot of things, and it's made a lot of headlines. But at the end of the day, from a number point of view, especially for those who smoke cigarettes, it's a much smaller thing. And what we're seeing is people who move to vaping, be it e-cigarette or being to cannabis, primarily to e-cigarette, they're now going back to cigarettes. They're not leaving vaping and not smoking. So it's a very complicated, and you're going to wind up having a bigger number of deaths. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done on it, and we are a big fan of following that industry.
JJ, thanks for being here today. I recently read an article that there's an oversupply, and in fact, some of the big growers are actually throwing the weed away. Can you comment on that?
Yes, that's actually a great. So how much time do I have left? Oh, good. So about a year and a half ago, a girlfriend of mine who was an investor said, oh, I'm sending this, and I'm getting to your story, trust me. This family office wants to talk to you. They're managing their money and they want to talk to you. So I'm super excited because we were really looking for money at that moment. He comes in and he's like, we're not investing. He had sent me a deck on a grow farm. And he was an older guy, very full of himself. And he's like, I really want to honor your time and I'm really busy. So did you look at the deck? And I said, yeah, I had a chance to look over the deck on this grow farm. He says, well, what can you share with me that'll be insight? Because the family's looking at doing $1 million minimum investment with him. And I said, does anybody in the family know about growing or farmers, or are they commodity dealers? And he literally does this. I'm really trying to make our time productive. So if you could just focus on the question I asked you. And I go, well, let me just point out a grow farm is called a farm because you're growing a commodity product. And then all of a sudden, he's like, well, the family's looking at it because they went in the cannabis industry. I'm like, yes, this is one of your 3 ways, but it's still a farm. And he was very flustered at that point. So it is a farming mentality, and you have a lot of people who overpromised and thought that they would grow the best, but a lot of time it's really the least expensive. And so and because there's no state lines, Canada can't get enough. Washington has too many, so you don't have a good supply system to be able to go because you have some people who grow better than others. And so once it's federally legal, you'll see it, but you will see several grow farms, and a lot of grow farms in Washington have closed because they had too much product.
Hello. So I'm a little curious. I'm someone who kind of feels that too much tax money is either wasted or not used well. Can you speak any to what the tax money is really supposed to benefit, either statewide or nationwide even?
No, I can't. I would try to make something up, but I'm like, let me give some real value somewhere else. Any other? Oh.
JJ, thanks for being here. Jeff Borek. Quick question. 10 years ago in the local QFC, the organic section was like tiny.
Right.
Now it's like half the produce section. What do you think the impact of organic farming will be with respect to cannabis?
It's a last great story. So I get started, and when I got started, everybody's like, you're going to be the Vanity Fair of weed. And I'm like, I'm going to be the Huffington Post USA Today. And they're like, that's not really pretty. And I'm like, yes, but it's crazy profitable. I'd rather own McDonald's than Canlis. And so I spent more time in LA at that time because, you know, it's the hotbed of the industry. And all my girlfriends would say, you're doing a mission from God, because now that it's legal, it's all going to be organic, and they're going to raise it in these beautiful places where nuns fertilize them. And it'll be so healthy and good for your system. As I got started and began talking to growers, they're like, hell no. We want it out and cheap, and we're using fertilizers just like most organic people do. But what we see, because we've partnered for data research with Yahoo News, there is an insatiable demand for wellness and mindfulness. And right now, there is not enough out there in the industry of organic or anything, because people feel that it's all about them at the moment and how can they look younger, better, fitter, happier. And one of the ways you can do that is because 30% of the Fresh Toast also has celebrity and other news. Read the Fresh Toast, keep an open mind. Think about this when you ever see anything in the news. And thank you. I felt super honored today to be invited here. And I hope you all have a great rest of the week.